So, are you ready to rock and roll?
I think so.
All right,
As long
great.
as you can hear me okay and everything looks good and all that, that's fine.
Everything looks great. Hear you great. I often find that the lighting in a car when I do video is best. For
Oh
me
yeah?
anyway. Yeah, yeah. I tend to look really bad in most photos. I'm not photogenic, and I think it's lighting. I'm very sensitive to
Yeah.
lighting, my skin tone, my
Wow.
face. But I find when I'm in a car, I look incredibly good and healthy, and it's the only time. It's weird.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, like in my office, I have a lamp that points up next to me,
Uh-huh.
and then behind me, I have an LED light that I've angled up to the roof so that nothing's direct light, it's more diffuse light and all that.
That's the
So when you
best.
see me on other Zoom calls, that's what I'm doing typically. And below my below my large monitor, I've got it on a stand, and the bottom of the monitor and the stand, I can just sit it there, and that's what you normally see me on Zoom calls. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah, I think the diffuse light is important. Um, in fact, that's why I opened my curtains in the back a little bit. I was experimenting with the lighting because
Hmm.
I couldn't quite get it right.
Yeah,
But I
that
think
sheet
it's
is new.
improved. Which one?
That sheet, I think that's a sheet
It's a
behind
curtain.
you.
It's a curtain. It's
A
new. Yeah.
curtain. Okay,
It's one of those what are the light blocking curtains? Those black curtains.
sure.
Yeah.
It's a nice idea. I'm used to seeing
Yeah.
your all those little
Right.
tchotchkes on your table
Right.
there.
Right. My attempt to decorate in the background. Right.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, that's gone. But Shabbat Shalom. It's Friday.
That's true. At
Yes.
sundown tonight. Yeah,
Hmm.
it will
Hmm.
be good. And
Yeah.
it's my fervent wish in these times that we all have a Shabbat Shalom.
Yes. Yes. Do you have any special plans for the evening, or just dinner with the
Well,
family?
actually, as it turns out, one of our nieces is graduating. They have a Hebrew high school
Uh-huh.
in her temple in Framingham, Massachusetts, and tonight's their graduation, and it's all
Oh,
going to be
wow.
done online. So instead of us schlepping to the temple as we did for her confirmation,
Right.
we're gonna be on the call and watching and cheering and all that kind of stuff from home.
Wow. Wow. Isn't that a trip? What a
It
world.
is.
What a world. Um,
Well, that's one thing about being human. We adapt pretty quickly to different realities, as it seems.
yeah, well, in this case, we kind of have to. And not everybody's able to adapt so drastically,
Right.
obviously. And my main concern, I don't want to get off on this tangent too much, but my main concern is how this is skewing sort of politically and becoming a political issue, and tensions
Yeah.
are increasing around those front lines. I don't like that. That kind of is the most creepy aspect of this whole thing. That
I
concerns
totally
me.
agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially since it's being incited
Right.
by the top.
Right. And yeah, other actors, the top. I mean,
Hmm.
it's amazing. So, bro, Scott Sherman, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Brother
Yes.
Jeremy.
Yeah. You've been very
Wonderful
supportive.
to be with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. You've been very supportive of the show, and I kind of met you, I think, partly through the show. I think you had sent me a comment or something on Messenger, or maybe it was from
Hmm.
Refracted Light or something.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate the support, and I'm always happy to know that someone's actually enjoying it and watching it, and find some value in it, because I
Hmm.
spent a little time on it, and I hope it's worthwhile for folks. So yeah, thank you.
Well, it's been my pleasure to watch the show develop and evolve a little bit, and the great guests you've had, and it's been a real pleasure to. And that's one of the great things about the situation, of course, is refracted light. And I've told so many people about refracted light
Right.
because if you, especially guys say, when we get back to lodge, I'm still going to be looking for Masonic knowledge. And the old guys in my home lodge, so I've been saying it's simple. Just you're on Facebook, go to Refracted Light,
Yes. Yeah.
answer the questions, and you're going to be amazed at the wealth of information that is
Oh yeah.
available to you.
Yeah, it's amazing. I've learned so much from all the presentations. In fact, it's almost overwhelming. I can't even keep up
It
sometimes.
is.
I'm
It
missing
is.
some nowadays. I miss some.
Hmm.
Um,
No, I
so
do too, and I like the
yeah,
ones that are recorded for later watching because I've
yes,
been trying to keep up, but not always live.
right, exactly.
You know, like last night, I think there was something, but I was watching the Scottish Rite Northern Jurisdiction's presentations of a couple of degrees
Mm.
video, um,
Oh, okay.
which very secure. You have to log into the member center, and then you're presented with an option to click here to go to that video, and then it brings you to a video page from Vimeo where
Wow.
they've actually filmed some of the degrees and are presenting them every Thursday, one each week usually.
And this is the I'm guessing the northern
Yes.
jurisdiction.
Uh-huh.
Yes. Okay.
Hmm.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing. Um, so you've been a Mason for a long time.
Yep.
Around 40 years, something like that.
Almost. Yeah.
Almost, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd love to learn about, I guess if you could remember your story before Masonry, and then how you got into Masonry.
Well, before Masonry goes, back to teenage years, really, when my one regret is I missed DMLA, but I'm Jewish, so I got involved with Jewish youth groups. There was something called AZA back then that I started. I was a very, very shy kid and
Mm,
a shy young adult, and I started getting attracted to leadership opportunities in that youth group. When I went to college, I joined a college fraternity that gave me that brotherhood and that opportunity to lead as I was developing there.
where'd you go to
Um,
college?
UMass Amherst for my undergraduate degree, and
Right.
Boston University for a master's degree 5 years later.
Oh, that's another common link we have. BU.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I remember. Yeah,
Yeah. I went to undergrad there.
but my late father, Donald Sherman, was a Mason since 1952. He was a typical man of his generation, where he served in World War II in the Army Infantry. He came back, and as a reward for that, was able to go to college on the GI Bill first in his family.
Hmm.
And he became an electrical engineer at Brooklyn Polytech. He came to Massachusetts to work for Raytheon Corporation, and he spent the next 42 years working at that company. Um, he joined the Masons in 1952. At the time, there were 3 different lodges chartered in the city of Waltham where he was, and he was told that he could only join Waltham Lodge because the other 2 wouldn't accept Jews.
Oh, wow.
Can you hear those beeps that come up on my phone when I get
No,
notifications?
no, I don't
Oh,
hear any of
good,
it. Yeah,
good.
nothing.
Then I can
Yeah.
ignore them.
No,
Good.
the sound is
So
perfect.
good. So anyway, so Dad joined Waltham Lodge, which was the only one a Jew could join in 1952, even, which was surprising because that's all gone away now. But he was of that generation too. The rules were kind of different.
Hmm.
If he was very into it, he wanted to become an officer, but back then I was told if you ask, you're going to be blackballed to be an officer. You
Right.
have to just show up and do things and get noticed. But they were meeting twice a month and bringing in four guys each session all year. They had so many men joining that it wasn't a chance. And he ended up meeting my mother, who was another Brooklynite, and they got married in '55. And he brought Mom up to Massachusetts, moved away from Waltham to Framingham, and they had me in '58. And so that's that background. So he was
Mm.
kind of like he was a Mason, but he wasn't engaged with it.
Hmm.
As happens, he got into his career in building a family.
Sure.
So I got to college. I joined Zeta Psi fraternity. Found out later that was founded by Masons at NYU in 1847,
Hmm.
and I immediately got the connection and started thinking about it. And then, since my dad worked for Raytheon as a college kid, I got to work at Raytheon in the summer.
Hmm.
So, and Raytheon Corporation shuts down the manufacturing plant for 2 weeks every summer, so everybody takes the same 2-week vacation. But the summer kids, they gave us an opportunity to either take off with our families or keep working.
Oh,
and
okay.
I wanted to keep working, so they gathered us up all from all over the manufacturing plant, which was about a mile from one end to the other, and we were all put in this one department that was functioning called reprographics. It was a place that was using ammonia base to develop blue line schematics, which was the
What is
way.
that? I don't understand that.
Engineering documents.
Okay,
It's manufacturing. So an
I see.
engineer, they get an order for something, an engineer specs it out, and all the drawings for how the pieces are made, how they go together, all of those at that time went through for one summer, I was a draftsman there on a
I see.
board with vellum paper and pencils and things like that.
Right, back in the day,
And,
yeah,
and those were effectively scanned in, and then they could print it out. And they were blue line drawings, they were called back then.
I
Any
see.
rate, as soon as I got to his department, the supervisor gave us an orientation. I noticed he had a Masonic lapel pin on.
Hmm.
My curiosity had already been piqued by my college involvement with Zeta Psi, and I talked to my dad a little bit, but he was of the type that until you ask, he's not going to say anything.
Right.
So, so I asked this guy, and he was amazing. Out of the 80 hours in his department that summer, he spent about 20 hours talking with me about masonry, answering a lot of
Wow.
my questions, not
Wow.
about anything that he shouldn't, but just giving me some idea of how vast the world of masonry was.
So
And
I mean, the
so
fact that you guys talked for so long, I mean, how many hours? You said 8 or something. That must have meant that you were very curious. I imagine you had a lot of questions. You were also
I
passionate to learn.
that's all true. I said
Yeah.
20 hours out of 80.
Yeah.
So
Oh, okay.
so
Wow. Yeah.
I was there 2 whole weeks and half of 1 week basically. It
Wow.
worked out, not all at once, but there were times he'd say, "Hey, come over here for a minute. I want to show you something." And he brought in a book or
Hmm.
something like that. Um, it cemented my thinking that um, I wanted to become part of this organization. But I realized that I think it was 20, and the joining age then was 21,
Hmm.
and I made the choice that this is probably going to be the start of something I'm going to be really involved with. So I probably should finish college first.
Mm.
And so I ended up, as soon as I got out, I applied and started the process. December of 1980, I had my first degree,
Wow.
and
So
January and February of 81.
when you had all those conversations about masonry and you were learning about it before you joined, what was it that really was the most compelling aspect to you about masonry that made you want to join?
Well, I think it's a lot of it's kept my interest over the years. I knew about brotherhood from my college fraternity days, just
Hmm.
like all the guys coming from the military in World War II gravitated to masonry at the time. But I also started learning about symbolism and history, and I
Ah,
find I really like
fascinating.
history.
Yeah.
I've really gotten into it, which was good at the time because I talked to the older guys in my lodge, and typical of the time, and unfortunately still somewhat typical, is they'll look at you and say, "Hey, God helps those who help themselves. Go figure it out."
Mm. Yeah.
And so, at that time in 1980, that meant going to the library. And
Right.
if you were lucky and
Mm.
spent some time searching, you'd find one book they had on masonry,
Right.
which which may have been a good find. It may have been one of those questionable finds, but it it's what it was. And so I learned where all the libraries were, and I frequented them, and I started voraciously reading. In April of 81, I joined the Scottish Rite because my dad had been in the Scottish Rite, and I got into that. And the editor at the time of the Northern Light um, became a mentor to me, and we visited I visited him in the office in Lexington and told him how interested I was in everything. And he gave me a complete run of the Northern Light magazine of the Northern jurisdiction,
Mm.
going back to its start.
Wow.
And excuse me. And and that's just where
Yeah.
it started. And they asked me to go in line right away, so I started learning that. And along the way, I decided I couldn't go through life being a shy person. So I've learned
Mm.
since then that I'm an introverted person, which effectively means, as I've learned along the way, that introverts can do extroverted things, but they get tired from doing it. Whereas
Yes,
extroverts doing extroverted things gain energy.
that's a
So
deep insight.
that's the main difference between them. Well, we had something I helped start some years ago called the Masonic Leadership Institute in Massachusetts, and we had people. We did Maslow, and we did all these other things that got into these discoveries. Because at the end of the day,
Mhm.
it's all about personal growth, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I feel like, believe it or not, I'm also an introvert by nature. And I
Mm-hmm.
had in high school a period of time where I made a forced effort to come out of that and to come
Yeah.
out of my shell and to be more social and be more extroverted. I think it was like my sophomore year in high school. I'd had
Mm-hmm.
enough of being introverted and I pushed myself to come out of it. But you're absolutely right. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
as much as I can be very social and extroverted, it does tire me as an
Right.
introvert
Yeah.
because it takes effort. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
perfectly happy being alone
Right.
in a forest and
Yeah.
not talking to anybody and just reading books. I enjoy that. I don't need
Mm-hmm.
that human interaction. I don't have that need so much as an extrovert
Right.
will.
Right.
Um,
And I think that's one of the differences you and I have been finding in this current pandemic restriction,
right.
because by and large, left to our own natures, we'd rather sit and read a book or
Yeah.
do something, do
Right.
some research or something like that.
Yes.
That's largely solo and all
Right.
that. But
Yeah.
so I've heard a lot of people, and it has, of course, affected me as this has gone on, because it's
Hmm.
just not normal. But I don't think it's affecting me as badly as if I was an extrovert.
Mm, that's right. So, you mentioned a couple things when you were talking about your background that I would
Hmm.
love to hear more about. One is that at one point they were saying Jews weren't allowed in certain lodges. Um,
Yes.
where did that come from? What's going on with that? I mean, I've never heard of that besides you, so that's very interesting. I mean, I heard about like
Oh,
blacks not being allowed in lodges in
sure.
the past, the whole racial issue, but the Jewish
Right.
thing is really odd, particularly because it underpins so much of Masonry, right? In the ritual,
Right.
we're reading the Old Testament. We're
Hmm.
talking about Hebrews a lot. You get into the Royal
Hmm.
Arch; it's a lot of the same stuff.
Hmm.
So why were they not allowing Jews? What was the rationale? Do you even know?
Well, I think I do. A part of this has to be that I have a view, thanks to my father, of almost 30 years before I joined.
Mm,
When I joined, the only way I knew that had been, other than what my dad told me, was there were a number of mostly Jewish lodges that I knew of in eastern Massachusetts. That only occurred because a Jew was accepted someplace, but then moved and wasn't accepted, and they met other Jews who were also blackballed or whatever, so they started their own lodge.
interesting.
And
Interesting.
there were at least, when I was a young Mason, there were at least half a dozen of them. They've kind of consolidated down, and at least one of them has kind of changed. It's not so Jewish anymore. It's a regular mix of people, like most of the other lodges are.
Right.
But it all comes down to when Masonry, if we say in the modern era,
Hmm.
when Masonry started in 1717, it was mostly Protestants. They
Yeah.
didn't like they didn't like Catholics, and they didn't
Right.
want Jews either.
Yeah.
Chances were most of those people didn't know anybody who was Jewish
Hmm.
back then.
That's
And
right.
it tended to be more the upper echelons of society at first.
Hmm.
And so there were two sides when it got here. It was both the aristocratic side, which was from England, and then in Massachusetts, particularly, we also had a group of guys who got a charter from the Grand Lodge of Scotland,
Hmm.
and those were the craftsmen. Though that's where the Paul Reveres and the Joseph Warrens came from.
Okay. Right.
And so, um, so a lot of it, who was the guy? Prince Hall himself, the man,
Hmm.
was in the Revolutionary War times, and we know that was pure prejudice on that side.
Right.
But it was a little more insidious, because a lot of Jews look like a lot of other people. So it's not skin color, but
Right.
there's the nose, or the
Right.
or just knowing about how we do things differently or
Right.
things like that.
Right.
And I do know that my father, I was curious for many years about whether my dad was told that, I believe it, but whether it was true. And when, after being master, well, an arsonist burned down our 100-year-old block-long Masonic Hall in 1983, and the Irish Catholic politicians wouldn't let us rebuild anywhere in the city at that time.
Mm.
And we ended up realizing that we couldn't exist as three lodges. And in 1988, we became Waltham Triad Lodge.
Hmm.
And I had been the next to last master of Waltham Lodge. I was the first junior warden, second senior warden, and third master of Waltham Triad Lodge.
Hmm.
After that, I became secretary. And in looking at records of the oldest lodge, Monitor, who were now celebrating that lodge's 200th anniversary, because Monitor was founded in 1820, I found an old correspondence where the grand secretary had written to the secretary of the lodge at the time and said, "We have an inquiry from Mr. So-and-so who's been blackballed by your lodge twice, and he's now wants to try to join the lodge in Belmont. Is there any
Mm.
reason we shouldn't allow this to proceed?"
Ah.
And the carbon copy that the secretary wrote, this was like in 1920,
Uh-huh.
was, "Oh, Mr. So-and-so is a very valued member of the Waltham community. He owns the Five and Dime in town, and everybody thinks very highly of him. Therefore, the only reason I can imagine that he was blackballed at the time was because he's a Hebrew," which is
Mm.
what we were called back in that day.
Right. Right.
And so I said, that's kind of my smoking gun, that kind of stuff actually went on, aside
Wow.
from anecdotal evidence that I'd had along the way.
Right.
So I think that's a lot of
Mm.
it. The sad and funny thing is that I never ran into any anti-Semitism in Masonry until sometime after I moved to Western Massachusetts.
Hmm.
So it's the most rural place I've ever lived in. And unfortunately, while I was trying to help a lodge get better, which they asked me to do, we started running into problems. And somebody finally told me that two old trustees don't want me there because I'm Jewish.
Oh,
And
geez. Okay.
and
Yeah.
they were doing things. So I said, fine, I've never been a divisive force, so I'll go find someplace else I can help. And
Right.
I did, and
Yeah.
things got a lot better. So
That's a
but it
shame.
was just it was a little surprising at the time. It wasn't a huge deal to me. It was just surprising.
Right.
Um, but
Yeah. I
it's
mean,
funny.
yeah, it is
We
funny.
have
And
the we have the time. Just want to point out
yeah.
that during the 80s and into the 90s, not many people were joining us,
Hmm.
such that three other men joined Waltham Lodge with me. None
Hmm.
of those three are still members.
Interesting.
Um, yeah.
Hmm.
It is interesting to me. I always wonder why I took to it and these other men didn't.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, and I think things have obviously changed over time, and people are a little more open-minded today.
Mm-hmm.
Not so rigidly defined by their identity group, whether it be a race or a religion,
Right,
which was supposed to be what Masonry was always about anyway. The whole idea of
right,
being on the level, that we're all equals, and we don't bring anything divisive into the lodge, for example. We don't.
right.
The reason why we don't talk about politics and religion is because
Is
that
just that
tends to
reason.
divide people. Yeah, and we don't want to be
Yes.
divided.
Yeah.
And I find, yeah.
I think that it's in places and times. I mean, look at the poem Rudyard Kipling, brother Rudyard Kipling wrote back in the 1800s about his lodge in India,
Hmm.
where everybody came from a different group, but in the lodge they were all brothers.
Hmm.
So
That's right. That's right.
it's whenever there's something, and of course Masonry has always been put down in dictatorships. So but the
Yeah.
80s and 90s were kind of tough. I was honored to become a grand steward of our Grand Lodge, and we don't have progressive grand lines in Massachusetts, and we don't have numbers. It's two of the unique things about us.
Hmm.
And we and during that year as grand steward, the grand officers spoke and said, look, the way things are going, we don't know if we're going to still be here in 20 years.
Hmm.
But now it's 20 years later, and I see the pendulum has kind of swung the other way. And I, as secretary of 2 lodges, I have a lot of young men coming in now who want to be part of us, who have heard about us through popular media, and who are saying, either I don't have a good role model in my life and I think I need one, a male role model, or I believe in a higher power, but I don't know how that should be defined. But somehow I need some guidance in becoming a man.
Mm.
And and you know, it's been wonderful to see.
Mm. That's great. So,
And a lot of guys are more interested in learning about going beyond the words and trying to look for deeper meanings
mm,
and trying to understand the history and the symbols and, you know, what it really means to be a Mason, and trying to get some education. And being that I've been pursuing that for almost 40 years, it does my heart good. I met you, who's
hey,
in
I
pursuit of
met you
such
too.
things, you know? Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's been one of the great things about all of this.
that's right. That's right. I mean, and speaking of education and your experience as a Mason over the last 40 years or so, I mean, what do you think are the biggest sort of life lessons you've learned that you feel like Masonry really facilitated you understanding those lessons? Perhaps there are parts of you that you've improved because of Masonry's effect or influence. But yeah, what are the big lessons you've learned personally?
Well, a lot of times you don't realize you're learning them until you've learned them, and
Yeah,
changes have come. But I think
that's
by
right.
and large is one of the things that immediately hit me. Well, 2 things. I gotta grab a drink.
Sure.
One of the things that early on hit me in the 80s, I couldn't interest any of my peers to come to the lodge because they'd come to an open house and see a bunch of old guys,
Right.
and they didn't want that. But I
Right.
knew that these guys were my mentors who were
Mm-hmm.
helping me become a better version of myself.
Mm-hmm.
There was also the fact that I grew up in a pretty good Jewish community. In my youth, I knew mostly Jewish people,
Mm-hmm.
and in college I expanded that some. And my I was very shy, so I took a public speaking class in college to force myself beyond that, by the way.
Okay.
And and so the fact that I got to meet people from all different walks of life, because you know I went to college, everybody I knew went to college and all that. And Masonry, I get to meet all kinds of different people that bring
Yeah.
different perspectives to things, and
Wide variety.
sometimes look at something in a way I hadn't considered before, which I consider a real blessing. So,
Absolutely.
which is why I'm still actively engaged in Masonry, why I still like leading. I still love meeting brothers. When we're not in this, I'm the guy that is usually traveling for everything I do.
Mm.
You know, from here to Boston, where I live, is 85 miles,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm there for meetings every Wednesday.
Oh wow.
And my mother lodge is 65 miles away, and my Western Mass lodge is 23 miles away. So I'm used to driving, and I will go anywhere. When I was a grand steward or I was a grand officer in one of the York Right bodies, I gladly would go anywhere I could
Hmm.
to have a new experience, to meet some new
Right.
people,
Right.
to
Well,
extend the hand.
it sounds like you got the support of your family. I mean, because Masonry does take some time, especially when you're
Oh, it
traveling
does.
all over.
And I was very blessed there.
Mm.
I got married a little later in life. I
Mm-hmm.
was 32
Mm-hmm.
when I got married. Um, though I absolutely found the best person for me. We're May 27th, so 3 weeks from yesterday, we're celebrating 30 years together. And as it turns out, my wife Becky was a Rainbow Girl, and was served as worthy advisor of her assembly. Her dad, of blessed memory, joined the lodge because he had wanted to be with his daughters in Rainbow, and back then that's what you had to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then he ended up getting put in line, served as master of his lodge and secretary. And um, and strangely, his lodge and my lodge met on the same night. So the 3 times I was master, we arranged to visit each other. But that was the only way I got to go to my dad's lodge, my father-in-law's lodge. But Yeah. So anyway,
Mm,
so there was masonry on in Becky's family, and actually goes back further. My dad was the first Mason in our family, and I'm glad that my older son has followed along and decided to join last year.
mm. Wow,
And we're
congratulations.
Thank you.
That's
And yeah,
great.
he's my he joined the Navy along the way, came back, wasn't sure what he wanted to do. Didn't think he wanted masonry because dad had been a Mason his whole life.
Mm.
But in Boston, where Boston University Lodge is, there's the Harvard Lodge, and there's also Major General Henry Knox Lodge, which is our military lodge. And the master said, "Why don't you bring your son over?" And we did, and the rest is history. But
Mm.
where my dad couldn't raise me on the third degree because of a rule that you had to be a past master to do that back
Mm-hmm.
then,
Mm-hmm.
I am, but so that doesn't, that's not true anymore. But
Right.
that lodge let me confer all 3 degrees on my son,
Oh,
his
wow.
roommate, and the other 6
Wow.
candidates they had.
That's
So,
actually really amazing. I mean, I'm sure you could relate to this, but I feel like as a Mason, one of my sort of hopes and dreams is that my boys will get into masonry. I have 4 boys.
mhm,
When they get
yeah,
older, I have one that's 18 who legally in Virginia
mhm,
can become a Mason now, but of course I don't want to pressure
right,
any of them. But I
right,
do hope they get into it, and the
mhm,
primary reason is because I feel like if they get into it, it's kind of guaranteed that they'll be on the right track in life. As a
yes,
dad, you always care about your kids. You always want them to have an
absolutely,
ethical and moral direction in their life, and to be good
mhm,
people, and to be, to contribute to society. And
mhm,
if they get into masonry, they've got that scaffolding, they've got that guidance right there, that will be directly tied to their conscience and their heart.
mhm,
It's kind of like religion in that sense, but it's not religion. It's
mhm,
more about ethics and morality. It just
mhm,
focuses on that essentially, and teaching you that through the symbolism, obviously, and the interactions and the social intercourse.
mhm. Well, it is that, and it's also that network of brothers that you get
Yes,
with masonry.
that too.
I
Good
mean,
point. It's
way back
community.
when I was first half of the '90s, I was working federal government contracting in and around Washington. And when that
Same
first came
years.
up,
That's me.
there was I know
Yeah.
there was a recession here, and my new bride said, "Well, if you want to look elsewhere, I'll go with you," which made me
Hmm.
happy. And we ended up, I got a job in Washington,
Yeah.
and Becky had a job up here, so we drove down and we found a boarding house in Alexandria, Virginia, where I basically rented a room in the boarding house for a little while. And my task was to make sure the job was real and
Hmm.
find a place for us to live so
Uh-huh.
that Becky would come join me. And I walked after work. I went to the T station in Alexandria, walked up the hill, going right by the Masonic Memorial there, the Washington
Hey, I caught
Memorial.
that. I caught that you said T station. Remember, this is DC
Oh
area.
yeah, it's
Metro.
Metro. Yeah, it's Metro.
I know T is Boston. I know.
It is. Yeah, it's the Metro station. Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember that. But thank
Yeah.
you. I appreciate that.
Yes.
At any rate, one evening I'd worked late and the lights were on at the memorial, and I said, "Well, let me see if somebody's home." And I
Mm,
walked in, and one of the Jackson Lodge was meeting that night,
mm-hmm.
and they invited me to join them, and they introduced me and said, "Who are you? Where are you from? What's about?" And I told them my job is to find a place for us to live. And at the end of the meeting, they passed around a pad of paper. And these fine brothers who didn't know me from anybody, and I just met them, signed up on next several weekends to pick me up and drive me around
Mm,
Northern Virginia and Montgomery County to, till I found a
mm.
place for Becky and I to live.
It's
And
incredible.
it was just, that was the kind of, your brother, we're happy to help, that
Yeah.
to me, wow, that's what this is all about.
That's a big part of it. Yeah, and it's amazing what brothers are willing to do for each other. I mean, I'm not the kind of guy who asks for help unless it was some kind of
Well,
real emergency, right? I would never. I just
that's
feel,
true of most
you
of
know what I mean?
us.
Yeah, it's true,
Yeah.
definitely of most Masons. And but at the same time, Masons are always looking for an opportunity to help. If there's a
Right.
brother in need, a lot of
Hmm.
Masons are looking for that. They want to help, and
Right.
they'll jump on those opportunities and overwhelm you with help oftentimes, which is just so
Yeah.
emotional and touching for many people. I know I've
Hmm.
heard many stories, many brothers that almost break down in tears when they remember how during some crisis in their life, all the brothers and the Masons came together, and their families sometimes, to
Hmm.
help them out above and beyond anything they would have expected. And
Right now,
yeah, that
I'm
kind of stuff is
wondering,
great, is
do you
amazing.
know if those guys were mostly in country lodges versus city lodges?
Um, it's I would say more suburban. The
Yeah.
ones that
Okay.
I've heard, the
Suburban.
stories
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
heard,
Uh-huh.
yeah, you're kind of in the middle
Hmm.
there. Yeah,
Yeah. No, and that's it. That's one of the differences. The Boston groups I'm part of were very close, but we come from all different directions.
yeah,
We're not in one community. So that's one of
mm,
those kinds of differences that
yeah.
I find.
And city folks are obviously also busy, so
Hmm.
busy all the time, right? Very little time, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um. So let's see. Okay, so I wanted to talk about the Jewish thing a little more.
Hmm. Sure.
Um, and particularly like some of the undertones of Judaism and some of the synergies and linkages that I've seen
Hmm.
between Freemasonry and Judaism. I mean, some obvious examples to me are sort of the symbolism of light, and in candles, lighting candles, which is a very Jewish thing to do.
Hmm.
Um, we have the three great lights in Masonry, and we always light our candles.
Hmm.
We are in search of light, and we are supposed to be a light unto the world, in a sense. We're supposed to bring light into the world. I mean, it's about self transformation, but not selfish transformation.
Right.
Why are
Right.
we
Hmm.
transforming ourselves? Is it just about because
Hmm.
I want to be more self actualized for my own self interest? Or is it a combination of I want that, but also so I can be a better impact on the world? Because your efforts in this world are only as good kind of as you are. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Hmm.
So you really need to do the two in tandem, and
Hmm.
that's a very Jewish concept. The Jews are supposed to be a light unto the nations. That's what's
Right.
said. We're supposed to bring light into the world.
Hmm.
We have this tikkun olam concept of rectifying the world or building the temple. And
Hmm.
Masons talk about rebuilding the temple, the third
Right.
temple. I mean, the linkages are incredible. And we do it through mitzvot and or good deeds, and Masons
Hmm.
do good deeds and charity, and that's
Hmm.
how they kind of bring light into the world and build the temple, or they up level the consciousness of humanity through periods like the Enlightenment and the Renaissance. Um, yeah, so I see a lot of well, not only that, but in the ritual we read a lot of the Old Testament,
Hmm.
even more so than the New Testament. I mean, a lot of that comes out in some of the higher degrees, perhaps the Knight
Right.
Templar degrees, commandery.
Hmm. Right.
But Blue Lodge Masonry is very Judaic in a lot of ways. So
Hmm.
I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, see, that's where my background. I've come to appreciate what I've learned from brothers who want to teach me about the esoteric nature of our words and things.
Right.
But understanding the history of it is where I started from. And if you look at the brothers who created our rituals,
Mm,
they came out of the Renaissance. They were very knowledgeable for the time, the Royal
hmm.
Society type of
Yeah.
people. They brought in the seven liberal arts and sciences because they believed understanding of those will help you be a better person.
Right.
They pulled various stories because they knew that work. They were all Christian, of course, but they understood that the symbolism of people coming together to build King Solomon's temple
Mm,
um, was a huge part of a lot of their understanding of history.
mm.
And so they thought, what a great symbol to talk about because we can have hidden meanings to it. Like you're not building an external temple; it's an
Right.
internal development type of
Right.
thing. So I firmly believe that there weren't really uh, any Jews involved with it. It was mostly Christians, an educated Christian's understanding of the classics. They knew Latin, they knew Greek, they knew all those languages, and they pulled from sources.
Right.
Um, that's like, but it's so much fun now when I'm teaching. I try to find ways to excite new Masons, as they're going through the degrees and learning.
Right.
So especially when I'm teaching the first degree, and I talk about, I basically tell them they should read the Book of Ruth. There's a section in the first degree talking about plucking off a shoe and giving it to a neighbor. And I said, if you want to understand where that comes from, read the Book of Ruth. Of course, a lot of people don't have time or interest to read the whole Torah now, the Tanakh.
That's right.
So that's a clue for them. People don't read Shakespeare as much as they used to. There's
Right.
several statements from Shakespearean plays that are in our rituals. And it was understood back 300 years ago. Unfortunately, the way we are now, we learn how to do a job instead of just get an education to learn how to think and learn.
Yes.
And so
Right.
we have to spend extra effort to get to a place where I think a lot of those brothers were 300 years ago. And thankfully, we got a lot of people who have been studying and sharing and looking at all of this. I've been into Masonic education for most of my Masonic career. And thank God there was a brother in Virginia named Alan Roberts, who was the most prolific Masonic author of the latter half of the 20th century.
Oh, wow.
And he wrote amazing books about Masonry in the Civil War, about George Washington. He did the revision of Coyle's Encyclopedia. He was a bit of a cantankerous guy, but he had a huge heart. And during the time I was there, I knew of him for a long time. I got to meet him, and he became one of my mentors along the way. And he saw my great interest in Masonic education. And one day in the mail, he had created an organization for Masonic educators called the Masonic, the Secret of the Masonic. No, what is it? Wow, it's tough. Oh, it's the Masonic Brotherhood of the Blue Forget-Me-Not.
Oh, wow.
And it's only given to people recognized as educators for Masonry. And I think I was number 316 in this organization, and comes with a nice lapel pin.
Okay. Masons love their lapel pins.
We do indeed. Matter of fact, my wife, who's the quilter, I thought this was an opportunity for her finally to make a quilt that she had an idea to do, and I like it, to display all of my lapel pins. And yet they fell into this thing of people need cloth masks, and we can't get together to quilt, so we might as well make cloth masks. And I think they're up to about 1,400 cloth masks they've made for people so far.
Oh, wow. Wow.
But I'm going to wait a little bit longer for my quilt to display all my lapel pins.
The whole lapel pin thing, it's interesting in Masonry. A lot of people call them like good guy awards, because Masonry is all about being a good person, right? So you get a little pin for being a good person,
Yeah.
And I see some linkages to sort of the military in that sense, that you have ribbons you get, as you move up in rank. And in the military, it's more like, a sign of leadership skills you've acquired, or some military relevant knowledge you now have, or some
you've been part of.
Yes, things like that. Whereas in Masonry, it's a little more informal, obviously, they're kind of fun little pins and stuff we put on. But in Masonry, it really is about, going through certain initiations, or, being honored in some way for being a great person, or doing a good deed, or whatever it may be, or because of maybe some education you've shared. But yeah, it could be a good thing and it could be a bad thing sometimes. I mean, I think it could be a risk if you need that, and it's for your own self-confidence, or to assure yourself that you really are good. You need these awards, or to boost your ego. That could be the sort of dark side of these types of things. But on the good side, but if on the good side, if you just take it in stride, it's like, you're not really after that, but when they come, it feels good. It feels good to be appreciated, and someone recognizes your effort to be a good person in this world. And that's not a bad thing to be recognized for that.
Right. No,
on the other
totally
hand,
agree.
Yeah.
No, well, there's two sides to everything.
Right.
Which is
right.
important.
That's right.
And you raise, it's a very true point. There are I wonder if it's an extrovert introvert thing. There are those of us who say, "Oh, well, that's really nice, thank you, but that's not why I do it,"
Right.
and others who it gives them a sense of value to achieve or attain or get some bling.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
Yeah.
it's interesting, and
Yeah.
at the end of the day, we're all about doing the best we can to develop ourselves and help others. So if some of us find that we can do that more easily when we have this recognition, God bless them,
Yeah.
why
Yeah. It's
not?
true. Teach their own. Everybody needs something else
Exactly.
to get them there. Right.
Exactly. Just that's not how I look at it. That's
Right.
why, you know, as a young past master, I got a bit caught up that now I'm worshipful,
Mm,
and all that.
yeah. Yeah.
And along the way, though, I realized as I've been asked to lead other groups and I've acquired more titles along the way of honorifics, I came to the conclusion 20 years ago that the best titles are the ones that everybody has, like brother and companion.
That's right.
And
That's right.
and that's why
Yes.
when I'm online, I refer to everybody as brother.
Oh yeah.
You know,
Yeah. And
even past grandmasters, I know it's still just brother, and
that's
they
one.
like that.
I like that. I like that because brother is the highest sort of title,
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
um, as a Mason, and but there are some people that really are sticklers about no, I'm right worshipful, or whatever
Hmm.
it is,
Oh, well,
uh,
yes, yes, yes.
supreme excellent master or whatever they need. They
Hmm.
need to
Yeah,
hear
yeah.
that. Different kind of people, I'm not
Hmm.
going to judge, but some people
Hmm.
they need that, and they're going through that.
Hmm.
That's a stage that they're in their life, and there's a reason for it, right? As there's a reason for
Hmm.
everything.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it's whether that behavior annoys us so that we want to dismiss it, or do we analyze it and say, where's that brother coming from that he needs that?
Right.
Is there a
Right.
way I can have that conversation with him privately?
Right. And you know what? If I know somebody is like that, I'll just make sure I always call them by what they prefer.
Well, yes.
I
Uh-huh.
do my best. And sometimes when I'm not sure about a brother, I
Hmm.
always opt for giving them a higher title just in case, because I don't know who they are or, what their title
Uh-huh.
might be. Maybe I know they're worshipful, but it's not clear in my mind if they're right worshipful. So I'll just go for the right
Hmm.
worshipful. And then they'll correct me
Hmm.
sometimes, say, no, 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 just worshipful. Or
Yeah.
they'll say, forget about that. I'm brother. Or
Right.
just call me Don. Some
Yeah.
people just want to
Yeah.
call them by their names.
Hmm.
There's a lot of variance. But everybody's on a different path in masonry.
That's right.
And who am I to judge? You know,
Hmm. And with
uh,
most of those people, I'll tell them that if we're in lodge, I will absolutely use your honorific. If
yes,
we're sharing a beer at
yeah,
a
yeah,
barbecue,
yeah. That's a little weird.
I'll just call you
Yeah,
Brother Don.
that's best, I
You
think.
know.
Yeah, in that kind of informal situation. Um, so now that we're talking about some, different personalities in masonry, maybe it's a good a segue
Hmm.
into talking about your experience, since you've been a mason for quite a long time.
Hmm.
I'm sure you've encountered in lodges some bad apples, some brothers that are creating problems in the lodge or making other brothers
Hmm.
uncomfortable, not not
Hmm.
uh not manifesting masonic brotherly behavior.
Right.
um and without getting into personal details, because we don't want
Hmm.
to embarrass people
Right.
or make this personal.
Hmm.
What kind of lessons have you learned? How do you deal with that situation when that comes up? When you got a brother who's maybe being kind of abrasive or rude
Hmm.
or hurting the feelings of other brothers or embarrassing people, or making just everyone kind of feel like they're walking on eggshells when they come to lodge. How do you deal with those kind of brothers?
Well, it depends upon your position in the lodge, I think.
Mm,
When that's come up when I've been master, I've shut down something in lodge saying, that's not real. This isn't the time and the place for that. We can talk about it afterwards.
there you go. Yeah.
And then I will follow up and say, where'd that come from tonight? What's going on with you?
Yeah.
Type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, there hasn't been a lot of that. I mean, sometimes as secretary or as a brother on the sidelines, I've been known to surreptitiously send a text to the master saying, are you going to let this go on much longer?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
No,
Yeah. Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
When I'm seeing
How?
the young master with deer in the headlights look,
Right. Yeah. How long do we have to
sometimes,
tolerate that? Right. Yeah.
yeah, really,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So thankfully it doesn't come up very much in my
Yeah.
experience. I
It
haven't
doesn't.
seen a whole lot of it such that I can think of about 3 or 4 or 5 examples, but that's it. And for
Yeah.
40 years, that's not too bad.
So that means we're not doing too
Usually,
bad with the Westgate.
right. Well, that's another issue. But
Right.
but usually, I think when we talk about the Westgate, we bring in people that don't understand what they're getting into in any way, shape, or form, and say this isn't what I was looking for, and
Yeah.
they usually just kind of disappear.
Right. And sometimes after
That's
they
what
enter the
I,
apprentice degree,
yeah,
they're
sometimes.
like, "What's this? I'm
But
out of here."
yeah,
As
uh-huh,
soon as they see the
yeah.
goats, they get freaked out.
Well, now, please don't go there.
I
I
know. I'm
actually,
joking.
that's one of my pet peeves in masonry,
Yes.
actually.
Uh huh.
The jokes about the goats is, you know, it's almost never been real, at least not in the last 50
No.
years. So, any, okay, having a background in college fraternity, we had to deal with actual hazing
Oh yeah.
problems.
Where?
Sometimes guys died in hazing,
Oh
so it
yeah.
was a big deal. Okay,
Oh yeah.
so I knew that beforehand, and I knew that my experience in becoming a Mason, there was some kidding, but there wasn't any, there wasn't anything bad about it. And
Nothing.
they
Yeah.
basically did to me what they did to everybody was, you see all those guys in the room, they all went through the exact same experiences you're about to go through. So
Right.
please be calm, open your ears,
Yes.
and just pay attention, and you're gonna have a good experience.
It's a
Um,
philosophical experience. There's nothing. There's no
yeah,
trauma. There's
right,
nothing
exactly.
traumatic. Yeah. So there's
That's
nothing to
right.
fear.
There absolutely isn't.
No.
And unfortunately, sometimes college men, because our brains don't stop developing until we're about 25, 26, a lot of college people are still finding themselves making choices that in later years they probably regret.
Mm, that's true.
And
Yeah.
I've learned along the
Yeah.
way that's really where it comes from.
Mm. Yeah,
And
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 and the jokes about goats and stuff, Masons even joke about it because of all the conspiracy stuff out there.
well, yes,
And then when we joke about it, that also reinforces sometimes this conspiracy theories out there. See, he mentioned goats. I knew it. I knew it. But
yeah,
we
yeah,
are
yeah.
actually joking, folks. There are no
Hmm.
goats
That's
in
right. There are
Masonry.
not. Well, going way back again. I've been thankfully had ways to meet Masons from all around the world from a long time ago. Back in the days of AOL and CompuServe, the techie people were on CompuServe and everybody else was on AOL.
Hmm,
And after running into anti-Masons on that service, every place some Masons would gather to try to type to each other because it was all typing interface back then. We get harassed,
hmm,
and eventually I found somebody to sponsor us to have our own Masonry forum on that platform. And as a result, I got to know Masons from all around the world, and we also ran into anti-Masons.
hmm.
So we actually had public debates with the anti-Masons back then
Oh
on
wow.
on the system
Wow.
because
Wow. I would have
because the
loved to see I would
platform.
it would have been great if those were recorded and videoed.
I
I'd
know
love to
I
watch
wish it
some of that
had been.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What it was we would have it. We would be public about it. We'd tell everybody. We'd invite people in to watch. You could have back channel typing to people in your group,
Mm-hmm.
and we all made an agreement that no matter how outrageous they were, we would always keep our cool,
That's right.
and
Yes.
they would always lose their temper
Oh
and
yeah.
go ape crazy,
Right.
and suddenly we get private messages from people watching and said, wow, we thought they were the real deal, but looking how you are acting and what they're acting, I'm beginning to think that you're more right than they are. And that's
Yeah.
exactly why we did it.
Well, as Masons, we have to
Because
be role models in society.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So it was quite a time. It was also a time when I used to. That's where I have a lot of stories because I used to travel a lot for business back then.
Mm.
And when I get to a place, I'd have told everybody where I was going, and either somebody from that forum or somebody from that forum, well, a brother that brother knew, would come to the hotel, pick me up, take me to a local lodge. I'd have a wonderful local experience and a nice meal. And while other people who had traveled with me were going to a bar.
Mm.
And the next morning, I'd be all set for my presentation, and a lot of them would be hungover,
Right.
and I usually did very well then. But it's why I've had such amazing, it comes down to it that I've often said the true secret of Masonry is that it's experiential. And
Mm.
why one person gets super active and somebody else doesn't is whatever reason those experiences either exceeded their expectations or didn't.
Mm. That's
And
right.
I've been fortunate enough to attend lodge in 15 states, 2 provinces, and 2 other countries. So I've had a tremendous amount of experiences, and I've learned that no matter how our rituals differ from place to place, or how the 3 lesser lights are arranged, it doesn't change the fact that we all believe in the concepts of brotherly love, relief, and truth, and that we are all, somebody who believes that this organization is bigger than all of us and is the reason why we can have so many amazing experiences.
Mm. That's great. So,
Uh,
Brother Scott, I actually have to cut out. I got work to deal with. This has been a busy week for me.
and I have
But
to go deliver some cloth masks to people who've ordered them.
oh,
So,
awesome. Oh, okay. We both got some
yeah,
plans. That's
yeah,
great. But this has been
we
a
do.
great pleasure, my friend and brother. And I hope
Yes.
we continue our conversation, and wish you the best as
Oh,
always.
thank you so much, Brother Jeremy. It's been a lot of fun, as always. It's what I was just talking about.
Yeah.
I thank God that I've been in this organization. I thank God that I'm still meeting wonderful other brothers like you,
Thank
and
you.
that we get to have these experiences that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't knocked on the Westgate door.
Exactly. All right, brother. Have a good day. Peace to
Take
you.
care.
All right. Thanks. Cheers.
Shalom.
Shalom.